An understanding of signal path through Pro Tools is actually quite an important and useful piece of knowledge. So let's see if I can show you what's going on. If we can imagine that this represents the file that is on the hard drive, which is known as raw audio. This is very important to understand. When we record in Pro Tools, we record raw audio. So the microphone gets plugged into the audio interface. The audio interface outputs directly to the hard drive. Doesn't matter if you put processes in the inserts, it doesn't record with those processes. If you record the output of your microphone through a hardware compressor before it gets to the audio interface, that's an entirely different matter, but that's not something that Pro Tools is going to be able to control. So the raw audio comes from the hard drive and then works its way to the inserts. Now the inserts are in order. In the mixer, they're from top to bottom. Here they're from left to right. So on the mixer, it would be the top one is the first insert, then that outputs to the second insert, then to the third insert, then to the fourth, then to the fifth. And if we bring up the next 5 inserts, it goes through to those as well. After the inserts, it goes to the sends, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated because there are 2 types of send. Now, let me just show you in the mixer. If I use Command equals to bring up my mixer, here's my guitar signal. Now, I'll just show you something else whilst we're here. So, the guitar track playing there perfectly well. Now, that is a mono track of audio, but we can use the pan control to direct that signal. So, we can send it to either the left bus or the right output buses. Okay, so that's an interesting and useful little bit of routing within there as well. It's important to remember though, here's a very important factor, is the fact that the pan control is actually what's called post fade, and that means that the signal goes through the inserts. Hang on, highlight it. The signal goes through the inserts like this to the fader, and then the output of the fader goes to the pan control, and then the pan control goes to those 2 buses, the left bus and the right bus, okay, for our output to our headphones. So that's very important to remember. Even though the pan control is above the fader, it's a post-fade thing, post-fade item. But yeah, so we've got our signal coming through. Oops, once again, just bring up the highlighter. So it comes through the inserts like that. And then it goes to the sends, and this is where it gets interesting. Now, there are 2 types of send, and again, there's a very good explainer video in these in the classroom section, but this is how they work within Pro Tools. I'm going to create a send here, like this, by selecting New Track. A stereo aux track is going to automatically be created, and this send will send its information down to that auxiliary. So, I'm going to open this up. So if I hold down Command and open that there, you can see M for mute, and then this P here, this stands for pre or post fade. Now at the moment and by default it is post fade. I'll show you what that means. It doesn't matter where this fader is because the output that's here is actually determined by the main fader. So if I turn the main fader right down and this one right up and hit play, we hear nothing. Okay, the reason being is that the output through the bus is going to be affected by this fader. So start to turn this up and we'll get volume, but I can turn that down there as well. Okay, so it's a post fade send that is affected by the output level of that fader. Now that is good when we're using things like reverb. So if on this auxiliary send that I've sent it to, I put some reverb, just use good old deverb again, that means that I can now put an effect on the guitar track. So the more I send, down the aux, and the less I send on the channel fader, make it sound really distant, or we can turn down the aux send and turn up the channel fader and make it sound much closer, although it's still got a nice bit of reverb on it. This is why we have post-fade sends for these effects processes. Now the other one, the pre-fade send, is just as important, especially important for monitor or headphone mixes. Just get rid of that. So this time we're in pre-fade mode, and if I turn down the fader this time, when I hit play, we get signal. Okay, that's because it is pre-fade. I'll just get rid of that reverb like that. Okay, so this is a separate mix that goes along to the headphones, entirely independent of what we're listening to here in the control room. So this is our control room level, that's our headphone level. Okay, I'm actually listening to both of those at the same time here, just because of the way I've got this configured. Okay, so that's a pre-fade and a post-fade auxiliary send. And like I said, the signal then comes from there to the fader and then out the pan control. Now I'm just going to delete that auxiliary send channel there, like that, and I'm going to create a new master fader. There's method in my madness, because the master fader is quite unusual. Here's my master fader. So signal coming out there, and again, this would be controlling my entire mix level. Here's the odd thing, okay? I find this quite odd. Whilst all of the inputs from our inserts, again, I'll just show you this using a highlighter pen, all the inserts there, and then it goes to the through the auxiliary sends, and then it goes to the fader, and then the fader outputs to the pan control. Then the pan control outputs to the master fader like that. But the master fader, it's the output of the master fader that then goes through its own set of inserts in that direction. Now that's a little bit odd. Normally it would be, and in a lot of DAWs it is, the output of that pan control there would go to the beginning of those inserts and then through the inserts and then to the master fader, and then the master fader outputs to our loudspeakers. But no, not in Pro Tools. It's a very important bit to remember, is that the output of the master fader then goes into the inserts. But once again, it's from top to bottom. Okay. Quite confusing. I hope all those arrows on the screen don't confuse you even more, but it's important to remember how Signal actually works its way through Pro Tools. We can make it very complicated. We can make it less complicated. It can be a very straightforward input and output. We can add auxiliaries, post-fade sends, pre-fade sends, and of course that master fader output is a little bit on the weird side. But still, signal path through Pro Tools, very, very important.